Welcome to Haunt Weekly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Crystal.
And this is Haunt Weekly, a weekly podcast for the haunted attraction and haunted entertainment industry. Whether you're an actor, owner, or just plain aficionado, we aim to be a podcast for you. And as we are wont to do on this podcast, we enjoy seeking out advice and thoughts from people far wiser than us on these subjects. And we are doing that again this week. And you know it's after season because people are returning our calls.
Yes. that does help.
That does help. So since people aren't running around their hair on fire anymore, right now we have the great pleasure of talking to Jamie Lee Sullivan and Rickie Haines of the Den of Fear in Richmond, Virginia. Jamie and Rickie, are you there?
Yes, yeah. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. So, how are you two doing?
Much better now.
We've had some adventures, by the way, getting to this point.
Yeah,
we've basically recovered, finally. It's only, only minor trauma.
Well, I take it your first season, and we'll be going into this in more detail, went well.
It did. We were able to run next year, and that's 90% of it right there. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
So how...
Well, okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go on.
So real fast, take us back, I guess, to the beginning of you two as haunted.
Exactly.
Thank you. Okay.
That's where I was going with it.
All right. I'm sorry. Mansplaining it.
I'll let Rickie go first here.
Okay, so like the beginning of my haunt experience?
Yes, please.
Yes.
All the way. Take us back in time.
Well, I started as a home haunter. My uncle was that house in our neighborhood. And so I would go over there and help him put on scenes and stuff like that. So that kind of got the bug going for me. And then I was away from it for a number of years, and Jamie kind of pulled me back in. She was doing makeup at a local haunt we were near in New Jersey. And so she just had me come with her one time just to kind of hang out, and they had an actor have something happen. And so they were like, could you take this role for us? And so I jumped in and wound up doing it for years and years there. And so fast forward to us moving to Virginia, we did a couple haunts down here, and we weren't as happy with the way some things were handled down here. So we kind of wanted to bring some of the mentality from up north down here. So we started looking at opening our own haunt from there. That took us about 5 years looking for a location that was suitable. And it was a lot of time, a lot of money, just figuring out like where we could be. We had to spend some money like kind of probing areas to have meetings with communities and stuff to make sure that we could do the thing.
Right.
So
that's a whole other can of worms in and of itself.
So when your uncle was doing this, how long ago was that? Like, how many years of haunting have you?
Oh God! I don't.
How old are you?
How old were you when you were
there
there?
in diapers?
20 years ago.
Yeah, fair enough.
25 years ago. Yeah, it was a while.
Yeah.
Like,
all right. So Jamie Lee, what's your background in haunting?
well, in my case, it's funny. I was the kid that always enjoyed that house. I've always been very into special effects makeup and costuming, and that's honestly was my bridge into it. I came to haunting kind of as I was trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do. So many, many years ago at this point, I actually went to school for entrepreneurship with the goal of opening a haunted attraction at some point, which is kind of, I guess, a little cart before the horse, but here we go.
Sounds like good planning to me.
Well, yeah, I only wanted to go to school when I felt like I had something to learn, because most of my background is very artistic, and I just was like, well, I can just kind of do whatever. Mm-hmm. So, silly me. I'm umming a lot. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Let's try that again. Moving forward, I basically put that on pause and ended up joining up with the haunt that Rickie mentioned earlier up in New Jersey. And that was, at the time, they were the Haunted Prison in Mount Holly. And these days, they are Bloodshed Farms Fear Fest, which has grown exponentially.
Hell of a name change.
Yeah, they moved location. And now they are doing over 2,000 people a night. It's absolutely crazy. But this was well over a decade ago when we started with them. I just have to shout them out a little bit. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, you're not. You're fine. Have you listened to this podcast?
That's kind of the shtick.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's what supposed to do. That's why they brought you on.
Yeah, it's true. Anyway, we when we moved down here, like he said, we kind of went, okay, well, I'll get my haunting fix. We'll find a place to hook up with, and that will be fine. But I had always figured that this would be a solid demographic for it. It's basically a college town. It's a decent place, and there isn't much down here in the way of haunted houses.
Right.
Most of them are trail walks, so that's another story entirely. But my background it snowballed into me wanting to do this, and it's always been where I've been heading. So this was basically a dream come true, and the 5th year of a 5-year plan to actually get it off the ground. So,
that, it's a very good plan to be able to launch in 5 years, though.
Yeah, that has its own set of hurdles. And honestly, if I had the unlimited money cheat, you could jump the line, basically.
Right.
VIP pass opening a haunt.
So how did you get the funding for?
Well,
okay, go ahead.
Well, sorry, I just want to say let's roll back to when you first decided you were going to open a haunt. Rickie mentioned that there were things they wanted to bring to the area. Yes. What were some of those things?
Well, because most of the haunts down here are on farms, they tend to all be trail walks. Things are spread out a lot. It kind of is this mentality of, well, I have all this space, I should probably use all of the space.
Yeah.
And
there's a very strong mentality down in Richmond of bigger is better. And with a haunt, that's not always the case. Like if your actor can only get one, like with an actor, if they can only get one scare, bigger's not better.
Right.
They should be getting 2, 3, 4 scares if they can. Like it makes it better for everybody that way. Makes a more intense experience, and it's more fun for the actors at the same time. So we wanted to try and bring some of that tighter quarters mentality was part of it.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse. It kind of goes into our thought process on pacing within a haunt and how it's kind of important to control the level of adrenaline that you're dealing with in your customers as they go through. If you are starting off so high intensity, people, and keeping it there constantly, it normalizes. People get used to it. It's a psychological fact. You become adjusted and desensitized.
Right.
But on the flip side of that, and with what we were dealing with down here a lot, is everything was so spread out that you'd get these little spikes, and then there was no escalation. You'd have time to cool down a little too much from it. So it ended up being a lot of walking down here, a lot of walking through the woods.
Yeah, like we went through a number of haunts here, and it was all, well, okay, we'll walk half a minute to another scene, and then something happens, and then, okay, you walk half a minute to the next scene. And it's like, there's a lot of space here, but it's a lot of unused space.
They're just trying to help you exercise.
Yeah.
How's your movement ring?
Let's just make sure that you get your good October exercise in the nice brisk air.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's not altogether a bad thing. It's just there's so much less down here that things haven't had an opportunity to escalate as an industry in this area. So we wanted to bring some of that with us too, and some of our more intense safety and security concerns that we have being from New Jersey. They tend to be very stringent up there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to bring some of that safety mentality there down here too. That was actually another big thing for us because that was why we wound up leaving one of the haunts the haunt that we were at down here was primarily over safety concerns for the actors and things. So it was like, yeah, okay, we need to make sure that we bring that New Jersey mentality where it's like everything has to be real safe. Cross your T's, dot your I's, make sure that everything is good for everybody.
Yeah, we're definitely safety first here too.
Yeah, safety seems to be in part more of an urban versus rural area. Meaning, like I find in a lot of urban environments, the fire code and the safety regulations are really tight. But you go just like 30 minutes outside the city.
Yeah,
a lot of
it's not so much. Yeah.
Well,
here in Virginia, we also have agro entertainment, which is like agricultural entertainment.
Yeah.
And there's almost no safety regulation there. Like
Yeah.
if you're on agricultural land, then you can do whatever you want. It's fine.
You know, it's absolutely hilarious.
Terrifying.
It's hilarious you mentioned that because we went to Renfest this past weekend, and then we also we're finally getting some agro-tourism in our area.
Right.
And we went to one place locally, and there are these big signs all over that say, under Louisiana code, blah, 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 whatever, I don't remember the number. We are not responsible for anything that happens to you, basically.
Yeah.
If you die on our property, it's not our problem.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that does not encourage me.
Yeah. So that was the other thing that we wanted to avoid with the way the haunting from our perspective was down here. It's like, okay, no, let's be better than that. Let's step it up, actually be mindful of safety and have a good, safe, enjoyable haunt.
Well, let's be real here. I mean, part of the reason that they're so strict in Jersey is due to Six Flags Great Adventure in the 80s having that enormous fire and killing 8 people. It only takes one instance like that to make it very difficult for the entire industry. And I don't just mean in that area. And by my view, I never want to be the issue, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the headline.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Though we actually were a headline this year, so.
Yes, we were.
Positive.
What the headlines say? I'm always curious.
It was in the business section. We were the headline for Halloween week in the Richmond Times Dispatch. I was talking about people trying to make money during Halloween. Spoiler alert, we didn't.
Well, you know, first season.
Exactly.
Season, yeah. The point of this season was to run again, and we did hit that goal. So
there you go. All right, so that raises the question for me. You've sort of got the idea to open your own haunt. When you start pulling together the 5-year plan, what were the first pieces you felt you had to pull together, and how'd you do it?
Well, I spent probably the better part of the last 4 years beating my head against the wall that is trying to start up.
So the first thing we did, we went back up north and talked to Clark, who runs Bloodshed Farms. He's kind of our haunt dad. And so we told him, this is what we're thinking about doing, and asked if he had any advice. And he was like, okay, I'm going to give the first advice I'm going to give you, you're not going to follow. I was like, okay. He's like, don't. Just don't. To be honest, best advice anyone's ever given me. But of course, he was right.
As Alanis Morissette once said, it's the good advice you just didn't take.
Yeah,
Exactly.
But I would, anybody thinking about this, I would give the same advice. Definitely consider that as an option. It is very difficult. It's a lot of work and a lot of stress.
And the amount of work that you think it is, it's more, you know, and that.
Yeah,
always
you can think it is. I thought it would be a ton of work, and it was so much more. So it's an undertaking, especially if you want to do it right.
All right. So, what were the first pieces? You said starting up. What do you mean by that in this particular case?
By starting up, I mean, the first thing we did have to think about. Now, it's important to note that we live in an apartment. We always have lived in apartments. So we aren't coming from a spot of having anything from haunting at home. It all comes from us working within other haunts and in the industry, knowledge, know-how. The first component was really education. We have, since being down here, actually encountered somebody who was the cautionary tale that everyone gives to anyone starting up, which is that story of the person that there is a home haunter and their friend tells them, you guys should go pro. And so they just do without doing any homework, and they lose their shirts.
Oh.
And we have encountered that person. And with the internet today, I didn't think that existed anymore. But it does.
Oh, it does,
yeah.
Totally. Could have told you that one.
Yeah, but she's absolutely right. Like, the most important thing is do your research. Like, the information is out there now. Use it. And that's what he missed on the thing. Like, he wound up buying a space or renting a space in a mall, and the cost there and the cost of insurance there, like, did not even come close to touching his expenses, and it ate him alive. And he went in figuring he would make it all back and easily, and it just didn't happen. And his haunt didn't wind up being what he wanted it to be, just because he didn't consider what would have to go into it. And so you really need to, like, take that time and look at, what do I actually have to do to make my vision happen?
Yeah, it seems to me, in my experience, there's two types of people who who attempt to open a pro haunt. And the first type are business people who see the long lines in a haunt and go, Jenkins, I could do that. And then they go and they can't. Because
occasionally they have enough money that they can.
Or they hire someone who can, but but it usually doesn't work, because they usually don't know diddly squat about what makes a haunt good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you have the other side, which are people who really love haunting. They try to go into it, but don't know diddly squat about the business side.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to make sure that you have at least something of a grasp on both sides of that if you really want to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's one of the more tenuous things that you can have. So I would say that the first step is, of course, education. If you need to, and that involves everything, and this will be a theme that I tie into as we continue talking about this, because aside of education and knowing, okay, well, and I'm talking down to, with education comes location. They kind of are tied together, because every place you look is going to be completely different. It's going to have a completely different set of requirements and a completely different set of rules, coding, code compliance, zoning, you name it, occupancy if you're in a building. That took up the vast majority of the time that I spent working on this. And it's kind of hard to say what comes first, because you kind of have to work on a lot of these things concurrently with one another.
Yeah.
Right.
Because along with that, funding is always an issue. We know it's an issue. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you've got the unlimited money cheat, it's going to be a constant problem. So,
yeah.
Now, as for us, we would have had a much more difficult time obtaining capital. But we obtained capital in the way that nobody ever actually wants to obtain capital. Basically, Rickie inherited a house from his mother when she passed, and I spent the better part of a year practically living in a house without electricity to renovate it to prepare it to sell. And that had to be split with his brother, but that's where we got most of our startup funding. So even that was a job, but that's not how anyone actually wants to get capital for something.
No.
Yeah. But there was that little bit of element of, like, yeah, it was, we started ahead of the game even there, like, because that was basically money that was left to us that really got it started. So, but yeah, it's not, it is something you kind of have to have a leg up to even do, really, at least to some extent.
Yeah, I agree completely, and that's like I said. I'm pretty sure you listened to our "Why We Don't Go Pro" episode, and that was one of the things that we kept butting up against. You keep butting up against, and it's weird because a lot of haunters say, well, go find yourself a partner. And I've seen what happens when you get a non-haunting partner in on this. It doesn't end well, because the problem is that usually people who are non-haunting partners want investments.
Yeah.
And let's just be honest, haunts are pretty crappy investments in general.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's more options now for starting to roll them into things that step outside of the season. But for the most part, they are a seasonal investment. You have such a small window to even remotely make anything back in. It kind of walks this fun line between passion project and potential income.
Yeah. I don't know many haunters who are able to do haunts year round as their full-time job. Not without like building the big props and set pieces and selling those to other haunts.
Yeah. Our friend Lewis at Darkwood Manor, that's his year-round thing. So he's one of the few who's actually managed to make it work. But with him, he makes the money on the haunt, and that's kind of just his year-round job. But he's also kind of got a captive audience because he's the only haunt for dozens and dozens of miles. So, but and also he's a really great haunt. Like, he's been in the top 13 a number of times.
Right.
So,
and I know Dwayne from 13th Gate here, that's all he and his crew do year round. Mm-hmm. It's a similar situation, huge haunt, all this preps, all these props and all that. And
well, what's interesting about Darkwood, not to just to throw back in there, is they're actually one of the few scenarios that I've seen where they're not big. They are not a very large venue, but they put on a hell of a show, and it works for them. And
it's actually not one where he's just dumping money into it. Like, everything there is like made by him. Like, he actually makes it his year-round job. Like, everything in there has had tons of love and work thrown into it. So it's a really awesome show there.
Have to check it out sometime.
Yeah. It's worth the trip.
So but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why that mode of investment, one of the modes of starting up a haunt, doesn't work as much as some people seem to think it would. Mm-hmm. We've been flagged away from that, even though we've actually had some pretty reasonable offers of investment. We've flagged those away because that's not the approach we want to take with it if we do it. But as you said, and you alluded to this earlier, you get the investment, and then you've got to research you got the research, and you're also researching the location. What was your process in trying to find a place? Because that is probably the single most important decision any haunt can make.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when we started, we had the thought that what we would do is we would find a piece of property, and it's the dream. You have a piece of property, perhaps you can have your own house on it, and you can live there, and you can have your haunt, and wouldn't that just be great?
Sorry, I drooled on the microphone there.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
First out in the city, though, that is darn close to impossible.
Yeah.
Well, yes. We were looking in the outskirts, and so in the surrounding counties, and as I looked around, what I realized is that the hoops you have to jump through to get something that is zoned appropriately for this is absurd. Some places, you have a lot of people that live in agricultural areas that live there because it's quaint. So and that really annoys me because technically a farm is a business. So if you're living next to agricultural land and such things are allowed on it, you should probably be willing to deal with what's allowed within the zoning. But that said, what we did is every time we looked at a prospective property, we then, once we were in contact with whoever was selling it, we would then talk to every surrounding neighbor. We basically would send out an invitation and have like a small meeting in whatever local firehouse would allow it and sit there and bring up what we wanted to do and field questions and get a feel for the immediate neighbors that the property was adjacent to, just so we would know if we were going to have any large pains in our ass.
Right. Yeah.
And that sent us away from a number of prospective locations.
Well, and with the number of stories that we cover on haunts having those problems when they try to open, that was a very smart move.
Yeah, we're going to be changing the title of the news episodes to Haunts They Got Run Away.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually, we just this year when we were doing setup, a haunt that was running in this area called Total Terror got knocked out of it because of those exact reasons. Like the community just kind of pushed back on it, and they weren't able to run because of it. And it's like it's a shame.
And this is a guy that actually bought a farm and his house is on it, did basically what we were hoping to do to an extent. He's further out, and only to have this rug pulled out from, they ran last year, but this year they had the rug pulled out from under them on it by the county. And it's a very real possibility, which is why technically it's something that shouldn't be a problem if you're within all of your zoning and setbacks and you're obeying all of your rules and regulations for the property that you're on, but people will make it your problem. Never think that won't happen. So rather than play that game, we figured we'd just avoid that game entirely. So
yeah, and I'm very glad we did. Like that was, especially seeing what happened there with Total Terror, it was like, wow, I'm so glad that we took that extra time and really scouted locations and didn't just jump on something that seemed like it might be a good thing.
Okay. Next obvious question. You're at this small firehouse somewhere, giving a presentation to a handful of neighbors. You're explaining that you want to open up a haunted house and this is what you want to do. And then the hands come up. What are they asking?
Traffic. There's always religious concerns.
Especially when you're rural.
Yeah. And because we are in a city and we were looking on the outskirts, we got a lot of concerns about bringing that element to their area. We're far enough in the south to where
that's some couched language there, is one might say.
Yeah, exactly. So that was there. We were just like, we don't want to be around those neighbors anyway. Screw that.
Yeah.
So that was but it's mostly going to be about the traffic that you're bringing to the area, and potentially religious concerns. That's been the majority of what we've had, and also noise. Like what kind of noise is it going to create? And
which is kind of hilarious at that rural because
it's like you're a mile away from me. Am I going to hear a racket from this?
Dear Jesus, not unless the place blows up.
Yeah. Meanwhile, our neighbors next door sit out in their backyard to hear the screams. So
that's they got good neighbors.
I was going to say you have acclimated them well.
Exactly.
Well, our little version of this as a home haunter is every year, right around mid-September-ish, mid-late September.
Yeah.
We prepare a very large goodie bag of cookies and stuff that we made, that Ellie made for them, and we bring them to all the immediate adjacent neighbors and anyone else that might,
along with a flyer to make sure that they know this is the days we're going to be open.
And that's prevented pretty much any problems along that line for us. We haven't had any real complaints between that and our very, very excellent front of house crew.
Yeah. So the next question I have is, where did you wind up settling? Did you wind up finding a place that was rural and accepting, or did you go closer into the city?
We actually wound up dead in the middle of the city. But
a little bit closer.
That's
a little bit closer.
Well, and even here, we're technically in New Orleans, but we're on the other side of the river. We're in Algiers, and so people from the other bank don't even cross the river that often. So I could see how that would have been a challenge had you been in a rural area to get convince people from the city to come out.
Yeah.
Well, any other haunt that exists in the area is a good 25 or so minutes outside of the city,
right?
Or from center. They're not to mention that we're sandwiched between Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, but that's a good hour and a half or so, I believe, south. And then we have King's Dominion, which is about 35 minutes to the north. So we're sandwiched between two theme parks, which is worth that both do their own Halloween events.
Right.
So what we were hoping when we realized, we went through a couple iterations. This all ties back in very nicely, because after we decided that the likelihood of us being able to have a piece of property and live there was just not going to work. I could have one or the other, but not both.
Right.
If it was good enough to have the haunt on, a house couldn't be there for one reason or another, and vice versa. So we moved away from that and had a long period of time of just trying to figure out, okay, well, we can't afford to have a piece of land and a house separately. What do we do? So we started
looking at like warehouses in the city and just property, like different buildings that would be large enough to have an event in, trying to find ones that were zoned properly. In a city, it's difficult because real estate is expensive in a city. Mm-hmm. And in Richmond and in most American cities at this point, because of the way the tax code is structured, the reason you have so much urban decay in city nowadays is it's better to sit on the property and not do anything with it than it is to sell the property sometimes, because you can just sit on it, and then if a gentrification project comes through, well, now you're sitting on gold. So it's better to just let it sit there and decay and have your tax burden decrease because the property value has gone down. So there's a lot of places where you're paying top dollar for a place that's basically garbage. So that really made it a difficult thing to find property that would work within our budget, because our budget was not high.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example for us. One of the times we were dabbling in it, we found a piece of just land. Mm-hmm. Nowhere near anything city or urban, off to the side, undeveloped. It was, I think, part of a factory at one point. Factory got basically they had to demolish it. It was falling down. Mm-hmm. And small tract of land, barely big enough to build anything on of scale, $1.1 million.
Oh, man.
And we're like, yeah, we can't do that. And then now it's becoming a hotel.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're banking on, unfortunately. And so, I mean, it creates a hurdle for literally any small business at this point. But that's a whole other can of worms. Yeah. But in the case of something seasonal, it's even more of a challenge. If you can keep it all year round, that's awesome, because that was our next thing as well. We need to be able to store things, and it would be nice to be able to build and to work on it and just have it. How can we manage that? And same deal, that didn't quite pan out the way we had hoped. But so I keep beating my head against this for a couple years. And during this time, I had begun taking belly dance classes, and at a place that's called Dogtown Dance Theater. And at that, I became eventually a studio assistant for the studio I was at, and was working with them as a basically side while I kept trying to make this work. So at a point, we get talking with the newer artistic director of the building, and we posit this idea. And that became our venue, because they're already a venue, and they had a parking lot across the street. And I already had an artistic connection with them that I had started building and working with them. And that allowed us the ability to say, this might draw attention for you guys. You know that, right? And really kind of leverage that to... Yeah. It helps when you encounter with venues. It's always a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get, because a lot of people don't want to haunt in there because they're worried about damage to the property. In a lot of ways, this was no different. The difference is this artistic director was able to see the theater in it and the art in it, which is so rare for somebody that isn't a haunter and has never, ever dealt with it. Right. So when we started fully talking about our vision, she was like, "This is legitimate theater. This is crazy, guys. Okay," and and
So
she went for it. She was all aboard
yeah.
at that point, but she still didn't know what to expect.
Granted, we didn't entirely either.
We knew what we were getting into. We've been around it for years and years and years.
Yeah.
We know what we're dealing with. We know the animal we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But people who, unless you've done it, you don't know. You don't know what's going into it. People get gun shy, and she, I guess, was just crazy enough to not get gun shy. But it worked out.
Cool. So you got to open this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How was the experience? How did it go?
Well, do you want with the lead up or just the actual running?
Lead up.
Okay.
Okay.
I was going to say the lead up
We've got about 20 minutes here, so
Okay.
give us some lead up.
Okay.
Yeah, the lead up is pretty darn important. We don't live in a house. We don't have a garage. We don't have a yard. We live in an apartment in the city that has one skylight. So,
So we rented a space to. We had purchased a bunch of wall panels when we first got confirmation that we could run from a haunt that was closing up in Buffalo, New York.
I was about to say, where the hell do you purchase wall panels? Oh,
Yeah. So we hauled them basically all the way from Buffalo down to Richmond, and put them into a storage unit. And then we wound up getting an art space here in Richmond. Moved all the wall panels from the storage unit to that storage space. It was kind of a mess because the storage space was advertised as an 800 square foot space and wound up actually being like 550 in actuality.
Yes.
So it became a very difficult thing because to work on any panel, we had to unstack most of the panels to get to the panel that we wanted, and then pull that panel out, paint it, do whatever we needed to do to it, and then restack everything. So it wound up like being an endeavor to do any work on it.
Yeah, when we moved in, when we saw the space initially, there was a bunch of stuff in it, so it was very hard to tell what size we were actually dealing with, but we took them at their word. Don't do that, ever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But really, we really lucked out getting the panels. The one thing about them, though, is we got them, and the age of these panels ranged anywhere from 2 years old all the way up to 12 years old. So
yeah, just like our haunt. Exactly.
And also, they weren't made with exacting standards by any means.
Exactly like our haunt. Standards, what are those?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We spent a lot of time like pulling screws out of them that were sticking out, pulling nails, staples.
That's not a problem we have.
Yeah.
We had to do.
We've learned a lot about materials as we went along.
Yeah, they also had not learned those lessons either. Like they were all made out of like double-sided OSB and 2x4s. It's just like the heaviest things possible. And with the space that we had to move it into, it was on the second floor of this dance studio. So all these panels had to go up a flight of stairs because their elevator wasn't big enough to hold a wall panel. So it was like, so we wound up tearing down a lot of these panels. Like we had a whole section of our haunt that was just made out of panel frames because we just took the sides off of them because it was like, these are too heavy otherwise. Like because it's 2 pieces of OSB, that's a lot of weight. Yeah. So it was like any of them that are just OSB, we're just going to kill. We're going to scrap all of those. So that was like one of the first things we did was try to cut the dead weight.
I'm so glad we got away from OSB, by the way.
Yeah, and these were 3/4 inch OSB. It was absolutely absurd. Yeah.
Yeah, it was awful.
Only time we've ever used 3/4 inch OSB was for building drop panels.
Yeah, they used it for everything. But yeah, so like we tore down those as much as possible, but we already had to move them 3 times because we had to get them into the space, get them out of the space, get them into the new workspace. So it was like, okay, we've already moved these enough. Let's just kill them now. So before we even brought them inside, we just tore them apart and got rid of the OSB. But one thing we realized pretty quick into being in that space was because of the way we had to work the panels, we definitely couldn't work all of them. Like there was no way we'd paint all those panels. So Jamie here was luckily a very strong girl, able to pick those panels up by her lonesome. So she was doing an inventory while I was actually at my desk at work. And so she would send me pictures of the panels. So she'd like unstack one, take a picture of the one side, take a picture of the other side. And I had devised a map on SketchUp. So I was taking the shots of the panels that she would send me and making 3D models of each panel that we had. So that way I had like a catalog of all the resources we had.
Good old SketchUp.
Yep. So that was invaluable. And it let us plan everything basically start to finish. But having those like panels like exact was very important because since we didn't have time to paint, we had to use the deco that was on some of them already. So that way we knew, okay, we have X amount of black panels. So we got these panels that are half red and half white. So we can make a scene with those if need be. So that was...
And these were painted like rock walls. These are painted like...
Exactly. Yeah. It's worth noting that basically... This was also a time and money-saving endeavor as well, because if you really look at it, when you don't have money, you spend time. And that's really what we had to do because, we can't build in place. So all of this, we had a week and a half to install.
Oh.
Then 2 days to tear down. So we had to have a very set game plan for going in and out.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm pretty much floored.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can send you guys a picture of our haunt from above, because one of the nice things in the dance theater, it has a mezzanine, so we could actually like view our haunt from a bird's eye view, which is
that wish I had that feature.
Yeah, it was so cool. Like I could see like at least half of the haunt, like see exactly where patrons were, see the actors doing their thing. So I got to be kind of a director from up above, because I was kind of actor manager for the haunt. So like I could see like, oh, okay, that's not working, or that is working. Keep them doing that. So Jamie was down at ground level in our exit corridor, because our haunt kind of entirely wrapped around an exit corridor that ran the entire center of the room. So that way you always had 50 feet towards that exit column, so it met fire code. And it also is just good for the actors because they can pop out to Jamie if they had any problems, like if something broke in their scene, they just come out into the exit corridor that's just a couple feet away from them and let somebody know. So it's a good way to set up the haunt, like just having it all around one single control area.
Yeah.
Now, from a linear forward pre-show standpoint, as it were, with all of this build and breakdown, and we also had the challenge of our landlord at the workspace we were dealing with we had a work yard as well, but they didn't want us ever leaving anything out. So every panel we had to pull out to work, we also had to put back every night. Until we just said, look, we're coming up on crunch, you have to let us do this, and they thankfully,
she did acquiesce there. Yeah, she understood that this was killing us. Yeah. I actually tore my rotator cuff lifting these panels, and sustained a couple other injuries as well, just from doing so much heavy lifting with it. So that kind of made her a little more sympathetic, luckily. She had just done the same thing, so she was like, oh, I know how that feels. Okay.
Well, I bet she didn't do it hauling haunt panels or
No. Now, when we actually came, like, none of this would have happened without our crew, and we'll get into that more in a minute, but there's things that happened on the lead up, having the fire marshal inspection, but where would you like me to go first, do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, start with the fire marshal and then talk about the crew, I guess.
All right.
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left or so.
Okay, cool. Okay. Basically, when we put out an actor call, we didn't put out any information that said anything about pay. And we had a turnout of actors that you literally could never have asked for a better crew. That was astounding. And this isn't just about the actors, but generally finding build crew is an adventure.
Yeah.
But we had some people come out and just go, I just want to help you build this. I don't know. It was just weird.
Yeah, it was pretty great. So we wound up really getting lucky with the build crew. But he said he wanted to go into fire first. So
yes.
let's go to that. So this was the single most stressful thing of either of our lives ever. It was because this is the one person where this guy can say no, and all of the time, all of the money, everything that you have put in here is now gone.
Right.
So you really have to make sure that like you have done everything right. You have to put flame retardant on everything in your haunt. Make sure that all your exit signs are well lit and well placed, and make sure that you've done everything in your power.
Well, basically, we contacted him well ahead of time, but not as far ahead of time as we would have preferred. But he seemed very impressed that we even bothered. But we gave him a map. We gave him our entire emergency action plan, which I really, really, really advise anyone looking to start up has.
Especially if you're trying to run anywhere that is rural or that is not rural, like if you're looking to run in a city or even in a big town, make sure that you have an emergency exit plan, and it covers like what you do in certain types of emergencies. Like if there's a fire, if there's a medical emergency, have that all laid out. That'll take you far. Like that's the right thing to do, and that'll help you a lot in being able to run.
Yeah.
And with him at that point, he looked everything over. He took our map and he said, okay, well, I'll be back in on the 18th to make sure that what you do matches this map. And we said, okay, I guess that went as well as anyone could possibly expect, because he didn't say no and he seemed okay. Good. So fast forward, and we have installed and we have most things up, and it's the night before we know this inspection is happening, and we open on the 19th. But
that night we were working on wiring. So like that's one of the big things that you need to have in place properly for the inspection to occur. So she and I wound up staying there. We were there awake till about, what was it, like 4 a.m.?
5:30.
5:30. And we wound up sleeping in the space and then waking up 2 hours later and getting back to work on it. So we were working like right up to the wire on it.
Yeah.
But we got it all done.
We got it all done, and he came in, and a few things that he mentioned were, we did have a dark area. I was aware that could pose an issue. Every bit of plastic that we had in there, because we used a black plastic to cover the top, but we were very careful. Everything was fire retardant poly, which you have to buy that way. You cannot flame retard, obviously.
Yeah.
And one thing he did say, and this actually is why you don't see a lot of dark areas in permanently built haunted attractions that are indoors, is of course the roof has to be permeable. Basically, the sprinklers have to be able to reach it. And our dark area wasn't even that terribly large. But we did have to cut slits in the top of the dark area. And let me tell you, it didn't ruin it at all. But he was perfectly happy with that. But barring, that was the main thing.
Main concern. So that was good. It was like, okay, thank goodness. We got everything. We made everything right. So...
But there's nothing more terrifying than the ability of somebody to walk in and just grenade everything that you have worked for. So,
and I will say the reason that we did get everything right was, like Jamie was saying at the start of this, do your research. Like use the resources that are out there, and we did. And we made sure to like, okay, what is appropriate fire code for this? Like, what is the way to make this right? Okay. And so...
Yeah, and that's something that we do try to do, even though we're a home haunt, is we do everything to fire code.
Yeah. Yes, that's wonderful.
36-inch walkways, never more than 50 feet from an exit, flame retardant, all the things.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
But we do know of someone locally who did have some issues when opening up in a new location.
Yeah. I would like to mention that if you're looking for flame retardant, this goes for, of course, not you guys personally, but
Right.
as well, Inspect a Shield is a great resource. If you call them up and tell them that you have a haunt, they cut you a really good deal on that. It came out to be about $28 a gallon, which is fantastic. Might I add?
Really good.
We've been doing the homemade stuff, which does work very well, but
That's cheaper than some gallons of paint right there.
Yeah,
so
It is.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've looked up the store bought, and it was much more than $24 a gallon.
exactly.
Yeah.
We also added from Rose Brand, Rose Art. Basically, they have a flame retardant paint additive, and the thing that the panels we had came from a haunt. I knew they had been treated, but since I didn't do it physically myself, any paint that I did put on the panels, I wanted to have a little something extra in. And that flame retardant paint additive is actually pretty fantastic and goes a long way as well. So those are a couple good resources for making sure everything's up to snuff.
All right. So you discussed the crew a little bit, discussed fire marshal. Now you finally get to open.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we did run into a thing like opening night is a whirlwind, and I've been doing a lot of background and staff work in haunts for over about 15 years now, I'd say.
Yeah.
Thereabouts. So once it's showtime, it's showtime. It's like any other time. Like once you snap into that rhythm, it's go time. You get in the makeup room, you start getting people in costume. It's ready to rock. The problem,
Speaking of costumes, that was kind of a difficult thing we had to deal with too. We had a guy who was supposed to be doing our costumes, kind of flaked out on us at the and didn't tell us that he hadn't done them until like 2 weeks prior. So like the last week before we ran,
we made 25 costumes
for our haunt.
Wow.
So, and that was actually one of the big compliments we had coming through was, wow, your costumes were best I've ever seen in the haunted house. I was like, oh, you don't even know.
Yeah, no kidding.
But again, with our crew, like they stepped up, they helped out with that a lot. Like our crew was top notch in every conceivable
There's
way.
no show without them.
Yeah.
No show.
Yeah.
And that carried all the way into the show. We did one night dress rehearsal. That was on the 19th. We opened on the 20th, and everything went astoundingly well. We didn't break 1,000 this year, but a couple of we had 2 Sundays and 1 Thursday. That's a thing to keep in mind too. We were open a grand total of 7 days this year because there was a wedding in front of us and behind us. So the week before and after.
So we have a very limited window that we could run our haunt in, and that's why our setup and breakdown were so tight.
Right.
That was the only way we were even able to get in that this year. But yeah, we ran 7 days. One of them was a Thursday, or 2 Sundays in there. So they were, but I think we did fairly well for the amount of time we were open, especially being the first year. We did, what was it, 900 and some people?
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you made the journey to pro, and that is something a lot of people who had attempted never make.
Yeah.
Never reach that goal. And every large haunt I've talked to, and I've spoken about their very first year being open, it's always some story that it doesn't sound anything like where they're at when I'm talking to them. You know what I mean? It's always, we had, like 300 people come by. We had plastic panels, and we were in a high school gym, and it was, So, I think the main thing your first year is getting there.
Yeah, just doing it.
Just doing it. And the fact you've got enough to do it again next year, win.
Yeah.
Do you think you're going to use the same venue?
Yes.
Yeah.
We're locked in for the foreseeable future. In fact, that venue has never seen that many people come through for anything ever. So now the director has some context for what she's actually dealing with. And one of the things we had to consider is that we did this on a hardwood floor.
Okay.
We put all of these wood panels on a hardwood floor.
Yeah.
And we did not destroy the floor. And we did that. We put underlayment foam on the bottoms of every single one of those panels, and that was its own undertaking. But considerations you have to make to preserve the integrity of the space you're in, and that's some of the reason that it's not a problem for us to be back. So if you do have a venue that's willing to work with you, take good care of them.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Well, I got to say, that's some great advice to end on. We're pretty much out of time, but I've got like 100 other questions right now.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, it's like this has all been so good. We're going to have to bring you back to talk more about marketing and other things that you guys did along the way. There's so many other things to touch on. I know we could probably fill 3 episodes, and we probably will. We'll just sprinkle them out over the course of the year. But Jamie and Rickie, thank you so much for being here and doing this with us.
No
and
problem.
Spreading your wisdom. I mean, I learned a lot in this about going pros. I mean, and I got to say, in a weird way, for me, it's a little bit reassuring because we've been doing a lot of this research that you talked about, and it's like, are we wasting our energy? Like, no, okay, good.
No, you are definitely not. Like, that is the key. That is the right thing to do. I cannot stress that enough. Like, the research is what makes it work.
Yeah, and of course, the research makes us more cautious and less likely to go pro. But if we ever do make the jump, at least we'll be better prepared.
Yeah.
Well, thank you two so much for joining us. We'll have to have you back soon. We got much more to talk about. But until next time, I'm Jonathan.
I'm Crystal.
And this has been episode 103 of Haunt Weekly. Thank you again, Jamie, Lee, and Rickie. This has been absolutely Rickie. I've said it right the whole podcast.
Yes.
It's the last
Rickie.
time.
Oh, Rickie, you're so fun. You're so fun. You blow my mind, Rickie.
That's what I hear.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Dinafear in Richmond, Virginia. If you're in the area, check them out next season. Definitely, this sounds like a great haunt.
Yes,
Thank
and
you so
remember
much.
to like us and all that stuff.
Haunt Weekly on Twitter, Haunt Weekly on Facebook, tinyurl.com/Haunt Weekly takes you to our YouTube channel where you can also subscribe and get lists and other neat things. Until next, we will see you guys next time.